guys in your DM, is it ever too late to respond? Is there a time period where it's like, damn, this shit was from 2024?
I recently showed them that I responded to a DM from 2 years prior. Somebody DM me. I didn't
Was
notice.
it successful?
I just noticed that you.
Did you respond? But did she respond back after that?
Yeah, she was like, yeah, man, late, and it was just that was it.
That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she like, I'm over you, nigga.
Yeah, basically,
You missed the train.
You missed the window.
So this kind of a window.
Jim leaned back in his chair, took a slow sip, and looked around the room like he was quietly setting the tone for everything that was about to follow. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't trying to over-explain anything. He just started talking, the way someone does when they've genuinely been through it and don't need to convince anyone of that fact. Jim said creating opportunities isn't something you just wake up one morning and decide to do because it sounds good. He said it comes from remembering exactly what it felt like when nobody gave you one, when doors stayed closed, when people looked right past you, when you had something real to offer but nowhere to put it. He said that feeling stays with you, and if you're honest with yourself, you don't forget it once you finally make it out. He started talking about everything surrounding them in that moment, the cameras, the conversations, the whole platform they were building. He said this was bigger than content. He called it infrastructure, something that could outlast trends and actually develop people, not just one person at the top shining alone, but a whole group moving forward together. He kept it straightforward, said too many people reach a certain level and then act like they got there entirely on their own, like nobody else deserves a real shot. Jim said that's the part he never respected, because in his mind, if you have power and you're not using it to open doors for others, then what was the point of acquiring it in the first place? He said success isn't just measured by what you have, it's measured by what you're able to create for the people around you. And if you truly understand that, he said, it changes the way you move entirely. He leaned forward slightly, his voice settling into something more serious. He said when he was coming up, there weren't many people reaching back. It was more like survival. Figure it out or get left behind. So now that things have shifted, now that there's more control, more access, more real ways to build something from the ground up, he feels like it's almost an obligation to do it right. He brought up how the whole industry changed, said it used to be labels and gatekeepers deciding who gets seen and who stays invisible. Now it's content, platforms, and direct connection to an audience. He said that shift opened the door for people like them to build their own lanes instead of standing in line waiting for someone else's permission. And once you truly understand that, he said, you can't go back to thinking small. But Jim was clear about one thing. It's not just about putting people in position, it's about putting the right people in position. People who are hungry, people who understand the weight of the moment and don't take it lightly. Because handing out opportunities means nothing if the people receiving them don't have the respect for what they've been given. He paused for a beat, then said something that landed differently than the rest. He said helping people actually makes him feel stronger, not drained like he's giving something away, but genuinely stronger, like it adds to what he's already built rather than subtracting from it. He said a lot of people don't understand that because they're operating from a scarcity mindset, like if someone else succeeds, they automatically lose something. He shook his head at that, said that's the wrong way to think, said there's more than enough out here, especially now. The real challenge is building something that lasts and surrounding yourself with people who can carry it further than you ever could alone. He looked around the room again, making sure the thought landed, then said the whole setup, everything they were building together, was just the beginning, not the destination, just the foundation, something that could multiply, spread into different spaces, different cities, different voices. Jim wrapped his portion by saying he's always been this way, even when the scale was small, even when it was a tight circle, a small studio, modest moves. He said the size never mattered, the intention always did, and his intention has always been to create something bigger than himself. He leaned back again, calm, settled, like he'd said exactly what needed to be said, and not a word more. Maine nodded slowly, really sitting with it. He wasn't trying to jump in quickly. He let it breathe for a moment before he spoke. Maine said that's the part people on the outside never actually see. They see the success, they see the lifestyle, but they don't see the thought process that produced it. He said a lot of people assume putting someone on is just about money or handing them a job, but it runs deeper than that. It's about trust. It's about genuinely believing someone can stand next to you and not collapse when it counts. He said you can give someone an opportunity, but you can't give them discipline. You can't give them hunger. That has to already be inside them when they arrive. And that's exactly where a lot of situations go sideways. People want the position, but don't want the responsibility that comes attached to it. He leaned forward now, more direct, said he's watched it happen too many times. People finally get in the room, and instead of locking in, they start looking around, comparing themselves, getting distracted by everything except the work. He said that's when you forfeit your moment, because the same way you got in, you can be replaced just as quickly. Dave jumped in, shaking his head like he'd been waiting to add to that. He said timing matters just as much, because sometimes it's not even that someone isn't capable, it's that they're simply not ready yet. And when you hand someone something before they're prepared for it, you can actually set them back instead of helping them move forward. He explained it plainly. You put someone into a situation they're not equipped for, and when they stumble, they carry that failure with them. Now they're second-guessing every decision they make after that. He said sometimes the most generous thing you can do is wait. Let people develop. Let them fully understand what they're stepping into before you hand them that opportunity. Spears laughed lightly, but he was serious when he spoke. He said the wildest part is that some people don't even recognize an opportunity when it's sitting directly in front of them. They're so conditioned to chasing whatever looks flashy that they walk right past what's real. He brought it back to what Jim said about building something lasting. He said too many people are still stuck in the quick win mentality, viral moments, fast money, instant attention, without thinking about structure, ownership, percentages, long-term positioning. Maine pointed at him, said that word right there, consistency, is what separates the people who stay from the people who fade. Because anyone can have a moment, anyone can be hot for a stretch, but can you show up every single day? Can you keep producing when no one's applauding? That's what actually builds something real. Jim nodded, giving them space to keep going, but clearly still fully present. He said that's exactly why he moves the way he does now. He doesn't just look at what someone can do today, he looks at how they think, how they carry themselves, how they respond when things don't go the way they planned, because pressure is coming regardless. Things are going to get uncomfortable, and if you're building something real, you need people around you who can hold steady without breaking or switching up when it matters most. Dave added that loyalty plays a significant role in that too. Not just claiming loyalty, but demonstrating it through how you move when opportunities present themselves. He said some people get a little shine and suddenly forget who helped put them in position. Spears smirked and said that's exactly when you find out who was genuinely with you and who was just passing through. Jim didn't react heavily to that. He just said it's part of the process. He said you can't control people, but you can control how you build. And if you stay solid in that, the right people will eventually align with you. Maine leaned back, hands behind his head, and said at the end of it all, everything circles back to one thing: purpose. He said if you're just chasing money or chasing attention, your decisions are going to reflect that. You're going to build accordingly. But if you genuinely understand your purpose, then everything you do carries meaning behind it. Who you help, what you create, how you move, it all connects. Jim looked around one more time and gave a quiet nod, like that wrapped things up without needing another word. For a moment, it wasn't about stories or jokes or anything surface level. It just felt like one of those rare conversations where everyone in the room knew exactly what was being said and why it mattered. Dave broke the brief silence with a half smile, like he didn't want things to stay too heavy for too long. He said, purpose sounds great, but purpose alone doesn't cover bills. Everybody laughed a little, but he kept going. He said, seriously though, there has to be a balance. You need purpose, but you also have to understand business, because if you can't turn that purpose into something sustainable, then you're just going to be passionate and broke. Maine pointed at him like that was exactly right. He said a lot of people skip that part entirely. They want to create, they want to express, but they don't want to learn the business side: contracts, ownership, percentages, long-term positioning. He said that's where people get taken advantage of, because they're too focused on the moment to pay attention to the structure holding it up. Jim leaned in again, building on that. He said that's why owning your own platform matters so deeply, because when you control the space, you control the narrative, you control the opportunities, and you don't have to sit around waiting for someone else to validate your next move. He said too many people are still waiting for approval, waiting for someone to tell them they're ready, and by the time that happens, the window may already be closed. Now you can create your own window whenever you're ready, but you have to be willing to put in the work before the reward shows up. Spears shook his head and said that's the part people resist most, no immediate reward. He said everyone wants results right now. Post today, blow up tomorrow, and if it doesn't happen that fast, they get discouraged and check out. What they never see are the years behind the scenes, the failed ideas, the slow stretches, the seasons when it felt like absolutely nothing was working. He said that's the real grind, the part nobody posts. Dave said patience is probably the most difficult piece of all of it, because you could be doing everything correctly and still not see it pay off on your timeline. He said that's when most people quit, not because they can't do it, but because they can't stand not seeing it happen fast enough. Maine nodded and said that's exactly why you have to genuinely love what you're doing. If you're only in it for the outcome, you won't last. You have to find something in the process itself, even when it's slow, even when it's frustrating. Dave looked around and said, when you really strip it all down, everything they'd been discussing comes back to mindset, how you think, how you approach situations, how you handle both the wins and the setbacks. Because everyone is going to have ups and downs. Everyone will have seasons where things feel like they're clicking and seasons where it feels like nothing is working. But the people who stay locked in through both, that's where the real difference lies. Maine leaned forward one final time, pulling it all together. He said, if you have the right people around you, the right mindset, and you're willing to stay consistent, eventually it's going to connect. It might not happen the way you pictured it, it might not happen when you expected it to, but if you keep building, something meaningful is going to come from it. Jim gave one more quiet nod, calm, certain. He said that's why they call it a movement and not just a moment. And that right there carried the energy of the entire room. Spears clapped his hands once, like everything just clicked into place. He said that line, movement, not a moment, hit differently, because too many people build for attention instead of building for legacy. He said attention fades fast, but structure holds. And if there's nothing solid underneath what you're doing, the moment the spotlight shifts, so does everyone around you. Dave nodded and said that's why people can be everywhere one year and completely invisible the next. No foundation, no real system, no team, just momentum built on hype with nothing underneath it. Maine laughed lightly and said vibes don't pay long term. He said vibes might get you in the door, but they won't keep you there. Once people expect something from you, consistency, quality, growth, you either rise to meet it or you get exposed. Jim leaned forward again, a little more locked in. He said that's exactly why he doesn't rush things anymore. Early on, everything felt urgent. Drop this, move there, chase that. But now he understands timing differently. Sometimes slowing down is actually how you accelerate things in the long run. Because when you're rushing, you skip steps. And those skipped steps show up later as bad deals, weak partnerships, or simply not being ready when a real opportunity arrives. Spears added that a lot of that pressure is manufactured anyway. He said social media has people feeling like they're falling behind in life when they're really not. Everyone's timeline is different, but when you're constantly comparing yourself to what you see online, you start forcing things that simply aren't ready yet. Dave said comparison might be the biggest trap out right now. You're measuring your actual life against someone else's highlight reel. That's a losing game every single time. Maine said that's why staying in your own lane has to be more than something you say. It has to be something you actually practice. He said once you shift your focus from what everyone else is doing to what you're personally building, everything gets clearer. Jim nodded, then said something that made the room pause for a second. He said, everyone wants to be seen, but not everyone is ready for what comes with being seen. He let that sit. Visibility brings pressure, expectations, opinions, and criticism. And if you're not grounded when it arrives, all of that can knock you sideways. That's why some people get on and then crash out. They weren't prepared for everything that came attached to the spotlight. Spears pointed and said, "That's the exact part right there." He said, "You see it constantly now. Someone gets a moment of visibility and then does something that unravels everything they built." He said, "It's not always about talent. It's about discipline, emotional intelligence, and knowing when to move and when to stay still." Dave added that ego plays into it too. Once people start receiving attention, some of them begin to believe they're bigger than the process, bigger than the work, bigger than the people around them. Maine shook his head like that's when it's already over. He said, "The moment you believe you no longer need the same grind that got you there, that's the moment you start slipping." Jim leaned back again, completely calm, like he'd seen that story play out more times than he could count. He said the goal was never just to get on, it's to stay on and build something that outlives you. If you're thinking short term, you move short term, but if you're thinking legacy, every single decision carries a different weight. Spears smiled and said, "So basically, more everything." Everyone laughed, bringing the energy full circle. Jim raised his glass slightly and said, "More everything, but done the right way." Maine tapped his glass against it and said, "Intentional." Dave added, "Consistent." Spears finished it, "Built to last." And just like that, the energy in the room settled into something solid. Less talking for the sake of talking, more speaking with actual purpose behind every word. Like everyone sitting there understood they weren't just passing time, they were building something. Maine leaned forward again, like something else was still on his mind and he wasn't quite finished yet. He said, "One thing people don't talk about nearly enough is sacrifice. Everyone sees the wins, but they don't see what you had to give up to get there. Time, relationships, comfort, sleep, and sometimes even your peace." He said, "You cannot build anything real without being willing to let something go." Dave nodded, more serious now. He said that part hit him hardest as he got older. When you're young, you believe you can do everything, be everywhere, keep everyone happy, chase everything simultaneously. But eventually, you realize you have to choose, and whatever you choose, something else is being left behind in exchange. Spears added that a lot of people struggle with that because they're afraid of missing out. He said everyone carries that fear to some degree, missing events, missing opportunities, missing moments. But if you're chasing everything, you're not truly committed to anything. Jim listened, then spoke steadily. He said, "Focus is the real currency now, not just money. Focus. Where you direct your time, your energy, your attention, that's what actually determines what grows in your life. You can't genuinely want one thing and consistently spend all your energy on something else. It doesn't work that way. Whatever you feed is what develops." Maine pointed and said that's simply a fact. He said people say they want success, but their habits don't reflect it. Their daily routine doesn't reflect it. Their circle doesn't reflect it. He said at some point you have to be honest with yourself about that. Dave said accountability is genuinely difficult though. It's much easier to blame circumstances, blame other people, blame timing. But looking at yourself honestly and admitting you need to do better, that takes something different entirely. Spears said that's why growth is uncomfortable, because you have to face things about yourself that you might not want to see. He said not everyone is ready for that, so they stay exactly where they are and just find ways to complain about it instead. Jim leaned in slightly, voice steady. He said growth is a choice you make every day, not just when you feel inspired, not just when things are going well, but especially when it's hard, when it's tedious, when it feels like nothing is shifting. He said that's actually when it matters most. Maine leaned back and exhaled slowly, like everything just settled. He said consistency during the quiet seasons, that's what builds everything. When nobody's watching, nobody's praising, nobody even notices, that's where the real work happens. Dave looked around and said that's probably the real difference between people who make it and people who don't. Not talent, not luck, just who stayed with it longer. Spears smirked and said one word, stamina. Jim nodded and said exactly that, stamina. The ability to keep going when it's no longer exciting,
when it stops being fueled by motivation and becomes pure discipline instead. He said motivation comes and goes. Discipline is what carries you through. Maine laughed lightly and said they were getting too real today, but the tone in the room said otherwise. Everyone knew it. This wasn't surface conversation. It was the kind of talk that settles into you and stays. Dave added one more thought before it wrapped again. He said when you set everything aside, the opportunities, the consistency, the sacrifice, the growth, it really comes down to what kind of life you're actually trying to build, not just how it looks from the outside, but how it genuinely feels from the inside. Because you can have everything and still feel completely misaligned if none of it connects with who you actually are. Jim raised his glass one final time, calm and unhurried. He said that's exactly why intention matters. Spears tapped his glass, more everything but meaningful. Maine nodded, built with purpose. Dave finished it, protected with discipline. And just like that, the quiet that came didn't feel like a pause. It felt like a full circle, every word connecting back to where it all began.